welcome to this Aberystwyth University History mini-lecture. My name is Sian Nicholas. I teach 20th century British history in the Department of History and Welsh History. And what I'm talking about today is the kitchen front, understanding life in wartime Britain through food. Just a little bit of background. This is one of the subjects I teach in my Year 3 special subject, Britain at War, 1939 to 45. The special subjects are final year modules. They're taught across the year in weekly 2-hour seminars. They're advanced study that focuses particularly on primary sources and their analysis, and on historians and debates about the subjects at issue. Topics I cover in this special subject include things like the Phoney War, Dunkirk, the Blitz, etc. I also look at wartime politics and popular culture, attitudes to national unity and national identity. And while I don't look at the fighting front, I do spend particular time looking at separately the factory front, the home front broadly defined, and what during the war became known as the kitchen front, the war in the home, if you like, how to manage food, eat well, and contribute to the war effort. Now, why should one study food in wartime? You might think there are a lot more important things to look at, but I think, if you look at the British experience of the Second World War, not everyone was evacuated, not everyone did war work, not everyone was bombed during the Blitz, but everyone needed to eat, everyone needed to shop, everyone needed to cook, and everybody felt the impact of food shortages and ultimately of food rationing. So that's the first reason. Secondly, I think food provides us with a real insight into other issues, other attitudes of the period, into questions of fairness and how people regarded fair shares, into government public policy, how it was seeing its responsibility to its citizenry. Questions of public health, of course, what you eat will determine how healthy you are. Morale. I think there's nothing more disruptive to morale than being hungry. And even things like crime. The black market sprang up principally around getting around food rationing during the war. So I think food, above all other things, if you like, brings everyday wartime life to life in a way few other aspects of the war do. Just a few things to set food rationing in context. If you look about the principles under which it was organised, I think they're very interesting themselves. The principles were very much fair shares. Everyone will have the same food ration, whether you're the king and queen in Buckingham Palace or a family of 6 in the East End of London. It was based locally. You had to sign up to your local grocer, to your local fishmonger, to your local butchers, and that would ensure that every shop in the country knew how many people would be shopping there week on week. And it was based on the principle that there should be some choice. It wouldn't just be a simple ration, the same ration to every family. The Minister of Food, Lord Wilton, in fact, believed it was very important for morale that people feel they had some choice in what they ate. So what you have is a system where you have basic rations by weight, milk, fat, sugar, jam, cheese, etc., or by price, meat. We'll talk about those a bit more in a minute. You have extra rations for children, for instance, extra milk, blackcurrant or orange juice, and cod liver oil to give them extra vitamins. If you're a vegetarian, you can swap your meat ration for cheese. And if you're a worker in heavy industry who's expending a lot more energy in the working day, you also get more cheese to compensate. But you also get what are called points rations, where goods that are not on the controlled ration are given not just a price but also points, and everyone has so many points to spend a week. So these could be tin goods like spam or tin fish or tin fruit. They could be packet foods like breakfast cereal. They could be dry goods like beans or dried fruit, things of that kind. Or they could be lend-lease goods, the kind of things like haricot beans or peanut butter that's coming from the United States. And you could choose what you spent your points on depending on what was in the shops, but you had that little bit of extra choice. There were also controlled foods, most importantly bread. In order to save the wheat grain, no white bread was allowed during the war. No white flour was available for bread making. Instead, everyone ate national wheatmeal bread, which was a sort of grainy kind of wholemeal bread. And there were, of course, unrationed foods that you could fill up on. So fresh fruit, fresh vegetables, potatoes, game, rabbits, pheasants would be off ration, offal, liver, tripe would be off ration. Also, canteen food, restaurant meals were off ration, although they tended to be limited in what they could offer. And takeaway fish and chips was off ration. So you could eat quite widely, you could eat quite substantially, but certain foods were only available in very small amounts. And these were, and I like to give my students these and ask them really to visualise, and actually sometimes even bring in the foodstuffs to show them what you can eat in a week. And you get some quite interesting comments. I mean, 3 pints of milk, most of my class tend to think is quite a lot. That's not really a hardship at all, even if you're having to make it up in milk powder. Butter, margarine and lard, 6 ounces between them is not very much though. If you think just how much people tend to put on their toast, but that would be for cooking as well. Cheese, 2 ounces of cheese a week, always causes my students complete consternation because that's really 2 mouthfuls and not much more else. Tea is interesting, 2 ounces of leaf tea. I actually experimented on this. You can get 3 grams of loose tea in a tea bag. So if you do the maths, that's 19 regular cups of tea a week. And most of my students seem to think that was reasonable. A couple of heavy tea drinkers, perhaps not. 8 ounces of sugar a week is a lot, though, and I think shows how people during the war years, put much more sugar in their tea, for instance, than they would nowadays. Jam or marmalade, really, that hardship depends on if you actually like jam or marmalade. Sweets, 3 ounces is really not very much. It's the size of a very small chocolate bar. And then you have meat, rationed by price. So you could choose to buy either a little bit of an expensive cut of meat, like a bit of steak, or you could buy a lot more of cheaper cuts and let it go further. But again, there's an element of choice there. How do people cope with food rationing? One of the things we particularly look at in the class is publicity surrounding how to eat on rations. And what you find during the war is enormous amounts of information being given to people. Food facts being printed in newspapers with handy tips or easy recipes. You have public cookery demonstrations all around the country helping people eat with the rations they have. And there's a whole publishing industry, in fact, in wartime recipe books, which make for fascinating reading. You can actually buy a lot of them still if you search online, and they're wonderful reads in many cases. You have encouragement. The BBC Home Service, 8 to 8:15 a.m, 6 days a week, Monday to Saturday, broadcast a programme called The Kitchen Front, which was one of the first food and cookery programmes on the BBC. And it was specifically aimed at ordinary housewives. The timing was very important, just before housewives went off to do usually their daily shop. And it gave people advice about what was in the shops at the moment, what kind of food you could cook, handy tips, again, for making your food go further. And that was seen as a really important part of everyday coping with food rationing, and a way that the BBC was really focusing on ordinary working class households to help them with this particular wartime challenge. And you even have entertainment, these little cartoon figures, Potato Pete, who had his own little song, encouraging people to eat more potatoes because, of course, they're homegrown and they're off ration, and Dr. Carrot, who extolled all the vitamin benefits of carrots, including, and I remember my grandmother telling me this, if you eat your carrots, you'll be able to see in the dark, which I think is not scientifically true, but in the blackout, possibly was one way of getting people to eat more homegrown vegetables. That's what people at the time were being told to help them with food rationing. What I enjoy most actually about this module, and my favourite seminar in it, is where I ask students, in fact, to find a recipe from a wartime cookbook, to actually cook it in their student accommodation, and to bring it to the class, and we have a big sort of bake-off tasting. And that's, I think, a really fascinating example of living through history, because it's when you're actually shopping, when you're actually looking at recipes, when you're actually cooking, I think that some of these restrictions really come to life. And we've had some fantastic things brought to class. Eggless chocolate cake with mock cream filling, which is a kind of chocolate Victoria sponge, or sort of birthday cake kind of thing. Wartime Welsh cakes, which use carrots instead of some of the flour. Carrot cookies, which are actually really nice. And mock goose, which is basically just vegetables and gravy, which is frankly horrible. But actually experiencing that kind of cooking, I think, again, really brings it home and makes it clear to people what wartime cookery was like. And actually most of it doesn't taste too bad. What we all noticed as a class was it may not taste quite the same, quite as good as you might expect normally, but everything certainly does. It's perfectly eatable, and if you're hungry, it will more than do the trick. I think what these examples show, though, is that food is not important, though, just for nutritional value. It's got a real psychological importance, particularly with things like morale. One of the things I think is most interesting is the sweet ration, for instance. That's for everybody, not just children, even though, as you can see in the advertisement here, adults are encouraged to let children have their supplies first. But I think this idea of everyone having a treat, everyone having something that isn't just the boring food, everyone allowed sweets, is really a fascinating insight into wartime psychology. Again, the fact that bread was never rationed during the war is really important. The government believed, possibly quite rightly, that if you couldn't find bread in the shops, that would be have a real impact on people's morale, and so bread itself was never rationed. Fish and chips is an extraordinary example. They were given special supplies of oil, special supplies of potatoes and of fish itself, because again it was felt if people had not much food in their house, if they were tired and didn't feel like cooking, they could at least get something hot and cheap to eat outside. And again, fish and chips, a signifier of normality. And this is, I think, again, where we find the role of the black market. Most people didn't use the black market to get around the system in any major way, but they tended to use it just to get a few treats, get a couple of eggs and some sugar and some chocolate so they could make a birthday cake or mark a special occasion. Anyone who did more than that on the black market was really ostracised or even reported to the police. But the black market really was, if you like, the slack in the system that helped people accept food rationing itself. And what you see when you look behind everything, I think, that's going on here is an attempt to retain a kind of normality. People trying to cook ordinary feeling meals in extraordinary circumstances, because if you can feel ordinary in the kitchen, everything will seem a little bit better, even in the worst of times. So just a couple of points really of overview. I mean, wartime food rationing absolutely in Britain was one of the most popular of all wartime regulations. There were surveys during the war that showed 90% of people not only supported it then, but felt it should carry on after the war. It was also one of the most successful of all wartime measures. By every measurement, the British people were healthier in the Second World War than they'd ever been before or since. They were eating a lot of fruit, a lot of vegetables. They were getting a minimum calorie intake, and they were getting vitamin supplements, particularly children, where required. They were cutting down on things like sugar that were unhealthy. They were eating more things that were good for them, like wholemeal bread, even if they didn't like it or appreciate it at the time. What we find as well is all that food publicity was helpful, but I would say up to a point. People appreciated it being there. It made them feel that the government, that the BBC, that newspapers were trying to help them in difficult times. Even if, I suppose, as with cookery programmes, you know, we watch today, we watch them, we enjoy them, we don't necessarily then follow those recipes. But it makes a difference. I think it made a difference to know that that help was out there. One of the most extraordinary, I think, things that we notice is it's not the working class you might expect who suffer with food rationing. In fact, most working class people in Britain ate better with guaranteed food supplies through rationing than they ever had been before. They were already used to saving food and using all the food they had. Most of the helpful tips were already known to them, and they probably ate better during the war than they had been done before. The upper classes, it probably didn't affect that much. They could eat in restaurants. They could have, you know, additional food supplies, you know, grouse moors or whatever else. They probably had, you know, cellars full of fine wines. It's the middle classes who really find their living standards changing. And they're finding out, I think, how ordinary people, how the majority of people, you know, normally eat, by finding out that they can't always get butter. They'll have to use margarine. They can't find cream. They can't eat as much meat or cheese as they like. And I think it's a real impact, particularly on that part of society. Thinking about the legacy of wartime food rationing, I think a couple of things come to mind. Food rationing didn't actually end until 1954, by which time it was very popular. But it remained a very powerful social memory. So in the 1940s, and going on to the early 50s, the whole idea of austerity is built around what food is available and what isn't. 1950s, the idea of affluence really kicks in when food rationing ends. The idea that you can buy what you want and eat what you want is part of that whole new feeling in society. And of course, in the 1960s, permissiveness of society is also paralleled by a new adventurousness in food. You know, learning about cooking French food or Italian food becomes very popular. People broadening their attitudes to what food they can eat. But again, what I find really interesting is how fondly wartime food rationing is remembered by those who lived through it. I recently posted a blog post on BBC website. I've put the link on this PowerPoint. And it's worthwhile scrolling down to the comments where you get some lovely responses from people about how they remembered food rationing and what it meant to them. And I'd really recommend you take a look at that. And finally, I suppose, you know, we've all been living through a time where we've been faced with empty shelves in supermarkets, perhaps for the first time in our memories. We're at a time, you know, when food economy is seen as more important than ever, where food security, you know, in a time of climate change, is going to become ever more a pressing topic. And I think looking back at wartime food rationing, I think really gives us some perspectives as well going forward into the future. So I'll leave it there, but thank you very much for your time, and I hope you enjoyed the lecture. Thank you.